Dear colleagues, I would like to introduce my talk on World War II theme in children's literature of Ukrainian diaspora. My talk consists of two parts, which you can see on the slide. In particular, introduction, military experience of Ukrainian emigrants and collective memory, the war in children's books, conclusion. First of all, it's necessary to note that Ukrainian war literature for children in the 20th century developed in two directions, namely the Soviet and the diasporic. The two branches of Ukrainian literature, Ukrainian Soviet and Ukrainian diasporic, show different kinds of collective memory. I present a point of view on World War II theme in Ukrainian diasporic children's literature. In my opinion, World War II discourse should be studied comprehensively through the category of memory. Ukrainian researchers explore the historical narratives of World War II interpretation because the Ukrainian nation needs to rethink its own colonial past to consolidate several kinds of collective memory and to form a united national memory. Thus, the purpose of my talk is to consider the implementation of the collective war memory in books for children and young adults produced by Ukrainian emigrant writers. There are following tasks of my talk: to describe the military experience of Ukrainian emigrants which stimulated the birth of the collective memory of the war and occupation, to determine the image of the dangerous and the suffering in the works by Bodnarchuk, Poltava, Bryzghun-Shanta, Dmytrenko, Fechuk, and Tsehelska, to identify models of discovering the other based on Levinas's theory of responsibility for the other. In my first part, military experience of Ukrainian emigrants and collective memory, I refer to work of Maurice, Halbwachs, and Barbara Shatska. These scholars represent the notion and the specific characters of collective memory. For their collective memory is created by a community about their past values and symbols. Collective memory saves the community's parts and helps to create the group identity. So, collective memory of Ukrainian diaspora comprise the reminiscence of the lost childhood or youth, loss of relatives, the defeat in the war, the occupation of Ukraine, the destruction, the imprisonments, and forced emigration. It's explained by the fact that a whole generation of Ukrainians was outside their native territory in the 20th century. The memory or heritage of Ukrainian immigrants is very rich. You can see on the slide the following thematic groups of memories. The different stage of struggle for liberty and the Ukrainian Revolution in 1917, the Holodomor, the Ukrainian famine of 1932-33, memories about World War II, the imprisonment of displaced persons, works about repression organized by the Soviet authorities, writing about this disastrous rendering of Ukrainian immigrants. Ukrainian writers were witnesses of and participants in these tragic events. In the literature of Ukrainian writers for children and young adults, there are three dominant themes of military narratives. The first theme is about Ukrainians joining different armed groups and the Allied army during World War II. The second theme describes the occupation of Ukraine by first by Nazi Germany and then by the Soviet Union. In works by the Ukrainian diaspora, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union are empires that viewed Ukraine as colony. A clear example of this is the article "The Invader Changes the Invader" by Les Alexander, published in the magazine for Ukrainian youth. The third theme is about the forced emigration during World War II. For Ukrainians, World War II is the most dramatic period. It's well known that in addition to millions of lives lost, Many people were forced to emigrate. There were 3 groups of Ukrainian immigrants. During World War II, more than 2 million young Ukrainians and families were removed to Germany for labor. Other people were in camps for displaced persons. Yet more Ukrainians fled repressions by the Soviet authorities for their progressive national views. So, rooted in personal experiences and views, memories, and other books by the Ukrainian diaspora formed the collective memory of Ukrainians in exile. Writers tried to preserve the memory for future generations of young Ukrainians. In my next part, The War in Children's Books, I classify works for young Ukrainians into several groups, define 3 models of functional interpretation of the war in Ukrainian literature of the 20th century, describe the Ukrainian nationalistic model and the models of reception of the other. So I classify works for young Ukrainians into the following groups. The first group of books contains writings by others who survived World War II. The second group of texts includes the books of contemporary writers about the modern war and Russian aggression against Ukraine. And the third group consists of translation of children's books about the war by non-Ukrainian writers. The books of the first group interpreted World War II in different ways. So there are 3 controversial models of fictional interpretation of the war in Ukrainian literature of the 20th century, such as the Soviet military models, well known in the world literature discourse. The second model is the Thematic model, consists of works by the Ukrainian Soviet writers named as the children of the war generation. The third group theme is Ukrainian nationalistic model. The third model of the war is based on military experience of Ukrainian emigrants. Thus, the next part of my talk highlights this war model. The concept of a child in the works can be characterized by the following features. He or she is a witness or participants of World War II. He or she may be an orphan, a refugee, or a fighter. There are 2 thematic groups of works about the war for young Ukrainians. The first one is about children who were forced to leave Ukraine during World War II. In particular, Tsehelska, in her book Petruseva Povist or Petrusev's story, tells about the deportation of a Ukrainian family to Germany for forced labor. Bryzghun-Shanta, in her collection Moia, Taiemnytsia, My Secret, and Bodnarchuk, in his collection Kladka, Small Bridge, rate the problems of the Ukrainian patriots' persecution by the Soviet authorities and describe the scope of the great emigration in wartime. The second thematic group of writings is about the collective image of a scout who fought for Ukraine and the underground army and the collective memory of the Ukrainian diaspora. This underground army is a symbol of their struggle for independence of Ukraine against Nazi Germany and the Soviet authorities. Both thematic groups of the books demonstrate the image of Ukraine in the past, present, and the future. As you can see on the slide, the image of Ukraine in the past appears as memories about rich motherland. In Bodnarchuk short story "You в новій Гаверлі, New Гаверла", children who were forced to leave Ukraine are going to search for the homeland described by their mother. The image of Ukraine in the present is the allegory of the mother's death. Nostalgia and sadness are the main motifs of the books Petruseva Povist or Petrusev's story by Tsehelska. The other says, already we don't not have the motherland, no native land. We are homeless without land and roof. The image of Ukraine in the future is connected with the dream of returning to the motherland. Diasporic writers intended to pass their own experience onto the future Ukrainian children who would preserve the collective memory about the war, Ukrainian heroes, symbols, and values. In the war books for children, Ukrainian diasporic writers suggest two types of discovering the other. The first one describes alienation and hostility, displaying xenophobia and imperial ambition. It's type of the other as dangerous. You can see on the slide picture from books. They are represented by the emperors and invaders who perceived Ukraine as a colony. The other model deals with communication, tolerance, and support as values of multicultural coexistence. This idea proclaimed in Tsehelska's Petruseva Povist, Petrusev's story. The writer argues that the war had divided the world, but it had also united. Taking part in the war changes everyone, and their moral values have also fortunately changed. Finally, I would like to summarize it. The works for YAF by Ukrainian diasporic writers are based on the collective memory such as the occupation of Ukraine during and after World War II, forced labor and emigration, the Ukrainian liberation movement against both Nazi Germany and Soviet authorities, and the Ukrainians joining the Allied armies. The Ukrainian diaspora fought to represent the Ukrainian war experience and their impact on the fate of Ukrainian children. War literature by Ukrainian writers also has a specific character and can be classified into three models, in particular the Soviet military model, Thematic model, and Ukrainian-Nationalistic model. The first model is based on military experience of Ukrainian emigration. Thus, it is revealed in the works by the most famous Ukrainian emigrant writers such as Poltava, Fedchuk, Bodnarchuk, Tsehelska, Dmytrenko, Bryzghun-Shanta. In these writers, I compare two models of reception of the other, defined it as dangerous and as closely related. Thank you for your attention.